It's good to see everybody's faces again. It's been a while, I guess December, November, when was the last time?
At the
In November, I guess.
shortest.
Yeah, I think so.
I'll just blame it on somebody else, just for no reason.
Well, it's only February.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So,
There's a Beth Reddington.
oh,
Look at that.
is that a relative of yours?
A
Beth
nice,
Reddington?
nice name. Now, yes, she is a U of S alumna, living in my sister-in-law living in Dallas. Or
Oh, is that who that is?
not sister-in-law, but niece,
Your- yeah,
niece-in-law.
Niece-in-law, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Hi, Beth.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you. No,
I
we
have
don't.
Tricia here with me
We
too.
don't see you
Hi,
yet.
Jim.
Hi.
I like it. And by the way, we Jesuits, of course, we came prepared. It's actually, it just happens to be the big bottle. That's what they put out, so it's not our fault.
That's right. We have no control over that.
You guys are the best.
Thank you.
I don't have a key to the wine closet, do you?
No,
Actually, we do keep a lot of things, well, a few things on lock and key, but the wine is definitely one of them. I guess people used to walk off with it. All right. Marge, you tell us when we're gonna be going.
Joe
All
has-
right, we have a nice crowd in here, but if you want to start, I'll just keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as we go.
Brilliant. All right, well, when we do all things, let's begin with the prayer. So we begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Good and gracious God, we come to you on this day filled with gratitude because of the relationships that we have, because of the lives that we have, and the ability to actually engage in reading and works like this, where through exploring the experiences of other people, we can actually see a window into how God is operating in people's lives. Continue to bless us, the families and those we love. Continue to bless very powerfully all of our students here at the University of Scranton and all our alumna and alumni as well. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
All right. All right, everybody. So it's good to see everybody back.
Yes.
We missed you, and we've had a lot of great conversations about this book already, so I hope you've enjoyed it as well. We are going to be doing part one. Part two is a bit lengthier, but part two, as you know, if you finish part one is a lot about her background, how she really kind of came into the church or is coming into the church, et cetera, et cetera. And the second half, of course, will explode with all that, but this is the important background information. So Jim and I aren't going to dominate the conversation. We will open it up if people have questions or comments about anything that they read or underlined. We have certainly things that we're ready to talk about, but we want to give you all a first shot.
Yes. How was the book?
Great.
Good.
Does anybody find it, again, some of it is dated in a sense of like, she is definitely a part of a certain period of time of American history.
Yeah.
With the socialist stuff and all those kind of things. Are some of you surprised by some of that? I'm just kind of curious.
No. Yeah.
One little thing, I used a memorial card of a Jesuit, I think last time. And in my pile of memorial cards is an old Catholic worker regular and a great pacifist and Jesuit who was on the faculty here at University of Scranton, Father Dick McSorley. There he is. Were any of you students of Father Dick McSorley's? Okay, Joe was one of the great characters of all time, no doubt. From a family of 13 kids and all sorts of other things. He was when he was a Jesuit scholastic, not yet a priest. He was in the Bataan Death March in the Philippines in
Wow,
World War II and survived it, thank God. And so he started the Peace Studies program at Georgetown, where we got to know each other better. I had already met him once or twice or so. But 1914 to,
Wow.
to
Yep.
2002 is his lifespan. And he was therefore 17 years older than Dorothy Day. But I think he knew her well. And even during some of the time we were at Georgetown, he was living in the Catholic Worker House in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So there's Dick. Bless you,
Have you
Dick.
seen that picture?
Nice picture of him too.
That
yeah.
is, again, I don't know if I've seen the picture. Oh, that's really neat.
Great. Okay, so Dick can be our patron.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right, so again, surprises, revelations, things like, wow, that's kind of crazy. She was living an interesting life, that's for sure.
Yes.
Mm.
You know, I will say that I had to keep reminding myself of the time of the year, because it's not something that is, you know, written about or said. So I'm like, okay, what year would this have been? This would have been like 1917 or 1920 or something. But you know, so that way it put everything in perspective for me. Whereas, but I had to keep reminding myself, because some of her struggles could have been 1970, you know what I mean, or 1980.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, so it was, or even present day for that matter, you know, so I had to keep like reminding myself as to, you know, but by the time we got to the end of part 2, I don't think we're much past like 1933, you know, as far as the time is concerned, so.
Mhm.
He published it in 1952, I think, so.
Yeah.
that
Right.
Also
Mhm.
is relevant.
Mhm.
Observations or just thoughts about her or about this,
Yes, about her.
for her writing.
Quite a personality.
I was amazed at just how, I mean, maybe she cuts a lot out, but the kind of bravery and courage to
Yeah.
part with her family and her father. When I was reading the part about when her father basically told everyone in the newspaper business, don't hire her because he thought it was not an appropriate profession.
Mhm.
That was a seminal moment, because that sent her down the road of anarchists and communists and socialists, and I just wonder what would have happened if her father hadn't said anything and she just went to work for a newspaper writing the home economics column. You know, I mean, it was just, it just seemed like a really pivotal point in her life that sent her down such an amazing road of like history. I mean, she was just living it every single day.
Yes, do you think she found what she really was? Found out what she really was?
I haven't gotten to the end, so.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Well, I haven't
Neither have
either, but my impression is strongly that she loved people, I think.
Yes.
That's only one way of saying it.
Mary, you started out by saying maybe she cut a lot out, and I kept being struck by how much wasn't there. You get to know Forrester only as a cardboard cutout. You don't really know the man that she fell in love with. And up through parts 1 and 2, Tamara is again just, you know, a sort of Cupid doll who makes an appearance. And so it was interesting to me to think about how she focused on social activism and omitted huge amounts of her life.
Agreed.
Marie?
I thought it very
unique that she didn't have much love and affection in her family, as she described, especially with her father. And she said, I believe she said her mother would give her like an obligatory goodnight kiss. And yet she cared for her brother and was close to her sister throughout her life. And then she cared for all these, she really cared about the human condition. And what struck me though was that later on about when she has the child, Tamar, am I saying it right? Because she wanted this child so badly, and then she's here and there and all over the place. She left the child quite often. But she did care for people and made a lot of different friendships, and had real concern for the underprivileged and social issues.
Oh, big time.
I'm amazed that she did so well with such little money, because she never seemed to have, a steady job, that she had an income, and yet she kept on going. So I don't know if that was part of her persona, because she mentions there's a whole section in there about poverty and how people view poverty who are in it and who are outside, not feeling poverty, but are limited. So I thought that was a little interesting for further study about her character.
Phil?
John's observation about how much she leaves out, I think, is an important one. And it's true of all autobiographies. It's a construction of how we want to be understood, or how we understand ourselves at a particular time in our lives. Her journals have been published, and they're a little more revealing, although it's still a lot. She's very reticent, for example, of talking about her sexual encounters, and she does at one point say that's because she doesn't want to scandalize the younger generation that now does this all so freely anyhow. So that's one where she explicitly says why she doesn't go into a lot of detail. And her relationship with Foster, she does go into more detail later, but it is significant how for all the impact that he has upon her, that she doesn't describe their relationship in a great deal of detail. So. Well, just one thing about Phil about the sexual stuff, because it is interesting. Towards the very beginning, she actually talks about like discovering kind of what sex is as a girl, and it was kind of a secret. And again, that would have been pretty typical, I think, for even a lot of us who are baby boomers. But Saint Ignatius, he starts his autobiography basically at Pamplona. At the Battle of Pamplona when he's 30 years old. And he says, up until this Battle of Pamplona when I was 30 years old, I kind of led a life that was a kind of ill repute.
Worthless. Yeah.
And so, of course, he was known to be a drunkard, a brawler, easy to insult, first to fight, one of those guys that if he walked into the bar, everyone wanted to go, I'm getting out of here, because there's nothing going to be, nothing good happen. So, yeah, who knows? Again, Ignatius, people have speculated he actually did write it, and the Jesuits were like, maybe we'll just take this part out and save that for a different, the secret Jesuit archives or something. But again, I don't know, but there has been speculation about that very thing.
Mara?
My feelings on this book, one, I feel like Dorothy Day had like 9 lives. Yes.
Yeah.
And we just got through this first 2 sections. So that was just like incredible to me, like how many different journeys she went on. And when I came to the end of this second part, I think she's always had, and you go back to when she was a little girl, she always had this just kind heart. And I just feel like it's this journey to find where she found her place with this heart. So that's just my reflection on what I've read to this point. But I would kept putting myself in, I was like, I could never have done any of those things. Like she was very brave too, like
Oh,
incredibly
yes,
really,
brave.
yes.
yes,
Yeah.
especially for her times.
I thought something was really interesting. And again, towards the beginning of the book, she makes a comment, and I actually mentioned this last night to a student I was talking to on retreat. Because this person was like, well, I used to have such an easy relationship with God. Now that I'm in college, I just feel distracted. And of course, I think that that's normal. Again, when you get older, and especially young adults, they're at a crazy cool time in our lives. There's a million things going on in our lives. We're trying to figure it out. And basically they were saying, well, it was easier to pray when I was a boy, in a sense. And so she says, children take God for granted. She says that on page 17. I wrote that down. Because when she starts to really kind of think about God, she's like, well, when you're a kid, God is just kind of there. And so, yeah, you just kind of believe because other people believe. But it's just kind of interesting that she was open, seemingly from the time of her childhood, to being open to this spirit. It took her, of course, many different ways and stuff like that. But there was a beauty of people too that drew her. And she does say very specifically, the poor drew me deeper and deeper into the Catholic Church. That was pretty interesting. She's especially talking about at one point, I think, the Poles and the Lithuanians and the Italians and the Irish.
Croats.
They were all poor, but they all would go to church. They had this great community. There was something very powerful about that.
Jack?
I was impressed, granted absence of very many explicit sexual details, but I was otherwise extremely impressed by her honesty about just about everything throughout, particularly from the beginning through the middle and to where we are and so forth and so on. Her own radicalization and her love, her growing love for the poor, and her involvement in protests and demonstrations, and also, of course, reading and so on, which she did from early childhood. One of the great features of her life was her reading. I, having been radicalized myself a little bit by being 7 years on a great Midwestern campus, University of Wisconsin in Madison, I was very impressed with her radicalization at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and how I think she is of a piece all through her life, at least to what we finished thus far, on her radicalization to insist on equality for the poor. And actually there's one little phrase that she borrows from the Wobblies. Well, she doesn't have to borrow it from the Wobblies because she was a Wobbly for quite a while, maybe didn't ever even stop being a Wobbly, but that the Wobblies wanted to make it easy, as it should be, for people to be good.
Yeah.
We talk about the common good and striving for the common good and so on. And of course, that is what is involved in striving for the common good. But it isn't explicitly said that it should be easy, or at least a lot easier, for people to be good. That could really sum up her life, or as someone said, one of her many lives, or
All
3 or 5
right.
out of her many lives.
Jack Miskin?
Yeah, I really would like to kind of echo what Maura said about it. It does feel like, I've only read the first 2 sections, but I feel like I've read, 7 or 8 lives, not just one. And what and I've not gone further, so I'm fascinated. My apologies to anybody who's read more of the book, but like what strikes me is, so she's had this very kind of radical life and with obviously social activist causes that she was very concerned with in her younger days, and now she's come to faith, and she just is astounded by the love of God through her understanding of creation, and now her first child. But she seems like she's got this conundrum that she's starting to work out, which is, have I abandoned the causes to which called me so clearly first in, am I lost in the love? And I think that that's one of the things that, for me, I certainly struggle with. I think many people certainly do. We all want to, be blessed by God, take advantage of the great things of love and material blessings that happen on the earth. But in the process of doing that, are you then, do you, in your gentrification, do you become soft, and do you forget the very cause to which you're called? And so I'm really excited to see the next part.
That's neat. Thanks, Jack.
Mary?
One of the things that really struck me was that she says when she was very, very young that her family was not religious at all. Yet she developed this really strong feeling about God.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of interesting because generally kids will follow parents' example, but she seemed to go off on her, on her own.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think some of what caused her to develop that, though, even more, was when they were in San Francisco and there was that earthquake. I think that also caused her to have an even stronger belief in a God, a spiritual power.
Jack?
Yeah, I am new to this person. I only read the first 2 parts as we were assigned. And, please don't take this the wrong way, but I felt there was a lot of meandering around in these first 2 parts. I mean, it almost struck me as, here's 50 pages of good information jammed into 166 pages. It just meandered all over the place. And on a more cynical note, what a name dropper. Oh my goodness. From Leon Trotsky to all these authors and poets. Unbelievable. But on a more humorous note, could somebody confirm for me, I think I know what it is, but what's the plain English translation of a disorderly house?
Say that again. I couldn't quite hear you. Say it again.
What's the plain English definition of a disorderly house?
Oh, I think it's, I'm presuming it's a house of ill repute.
It's a brothel. in
Yeah,
plain English.
I guess that's another euphemism, I guess.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Well, that's what I was gathering, but
Yeah.
now, one of the, I think this interesting thing, so Mary had said this just a few seconds ago about, again, her religious inclinations. Because when you think about it, of course, the radical left really doesn't have a whole lot to do with religion, but she still always found her way to religion. But she also did pay attention. Remember, she talked about Mrs. Barrett, who was her friend's, I guess they lived in an apartment building together or something as a girl, and she was friends with the Barrett girl, I guess. And so the mom would pray openly. She was Catholic, and so she would, get down and pray or see the rosary, and she'd talk about it. But I think this is very weird because I would not have done this. But the fact that she would go to mass, she would just, well, I'll go to mass with them. And she even says, well, I'm the only person in my family went to church, and she was like 10 years old, and she'd go to church. I don't think I would have done that. I don't know. She had a lot of moxie, but I do think there was something about that. She clearly had some kind of a internal connection to the spiritual and to God. I think it's pretty amazing.
I would like just to add to that something that's, I think, well, what I thought was a rich theme, if not the richest theme, the seed of God's grace and calling and so on.
Very early.
Growing in her, being noticed by her, something that could be different from a religious thing, but her addiction to ritualism, which she purified, I think, in the sense of using Catholicism as a fulfillment, as it can indeed be, of a grace of ritualism, but the ritualism was not her only grace in the matter. She sort of she had to give up a lot for religion, for her love with Forster, for example. Anyway, some reactions on that, please.
Mary?
I don't have a reaction to that. I was gonna ask something else. So should I not?
Well, go ahead.
No, you're allowed, go ahead.
So just on the name dropping kind of meandering, I felt that name dropping was very useful for me to situate her as a force in a man's world, and all of these people that she was mixing with as a woman at the turn of the century, I found absolutely incredible. And the meandering, I felt like if I were interviewing her, you know, just kind of in front of a fireplace, the book seemed very conversational to me. So anyway, the other thing I thought it was really interesting that at the end of part 2, she still hasn't met or hung out with a Catholic. Like, she's gone to all these priests for mentoring and nuns, and she still hasn't given over from that. I feel like it's a holdover from the religion is an opiate of the people, that if she makes that final leap and actually starts consorting with actual Catholics, that she will have gone over to the dark side in a sense for her. And I just found it amazing how she's done all this spiritual work, and that how do you not meet any Catholics? But I think there was a time in history, right, where Catholicism wasn't the mainstream religion.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know my history,
And
but
at this time, again, it was strange. It would have been strange. I remember my mother saying, and I'm sure your all parents may have had the same thing. You just didn't go to Protestant churches if you were a Catholic, and vice versa. It was actually considered a sin, I think, in that time period if you went to church. You know, it wasn't like we're going to visit Aunt Margaret and Uncle Steve, and we're going to just go to the Methodist church. They would have been like, oh no. First of all, you're not invited, or whatever. So it was pretty strict. So yeah, it is interesting. But she still would go with these people. It was interesting. She wasn't baptized, or no, she was baptized, I think. Sorry.
Well, also, it's really the last page of part 2 shows what has already been building up, and then as an overture tells you she's going to meet the person that changes her life so much. I would even contend that he doesn't change it all that much, but he's tremendously instrumental. But at any rate, she's fully and actively Catholic for the rest of the book, I think, although I haven't reread the rest of the book yet. But you're right, she may soft pedal it a little bit more than was the case through the second part.
Michael?
And also on the meandering thing, she meandered. I think
you're right.
I mean, her life was meandered.
Yeah. Michael? Up, you're muted.
She does actually say she does say one place, the Catholics were a world apart, a people within a people, making little impression on a tremendous non-Catholic population of the country.
Yeah.
So she really isn't even giving them much attention at all.
Yeah.
Oh, the despising of non-Catholics for Catholics in those times especially was colossal.
And vice versa. I mean, remember even JFK in 1960, it was, yeah. I used to live, God bless, I used to live in the South. I lived in North Carolina, which is a very Baptist, there are only 4% of the population of North Carolina is Catholic. And that's after all the Yankees moved down to the Research Triangle. And there were things definitely said to me as a Catholic priest. They're like, oh, you're one of them devil word. Literally, that's a quote. You know, I was getting my haircut once and someone said, I said, they said, what do you do? I said, I'm a Catholic priest. And they said, oh, are you one of them people that goes into that box and tells them people everything you've done wrong? And I'm like, I'm the guy in the box. Well, I was ready for the scissors to kind of go right into my neck. So there was a lot of tension between Protestants, Catholics at that time.
Mara?
I can't remember where I was reading this came up, but at one point she talks about when she was studying or learning about Catholics, that it struck her how interesting it was that Catholics in the rest of the world were wealthy and the Catholics that she encountered were the poor.
Mhm.
And I don't know if anybody can help me where that was, or maybe I just misunderstood that. But I felt like maybe that was where a coming together of what she was trying to do for the poor and the different movements she was in, where she started getting drawn towards the Catholic Church. Because I think she said at one point, I don't, all these different ethnic groups, and they're so, like they're so devoted, was not the word she used, to being Catholic. And that just,
That's on page 97.
yeah. And I just feel like maybe that's where she started getting this burn inside of her, because she saw this faith of these very poor people and they were so devoted to being Catholic.
Mhm.
Well, isn't it funny that, again, she was really young when she first moved to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And again, I've lived in Manhattan for years of my life, and that's a reasonable place now, but it wasn't in those days. And remember, she said she was living on like welfare rations. And, and she was young, and so her embrace of the poverty is interesting. Again, especially her family was of some means. I mean, they weren't rich, but they certainly
Educated.
educated. And she even mentions that, I think, after the second arrest, she talks about her own privilege. Like, I can kind of walk away from this if I want, being a college kind of girl type thing. But, I thought that was her embrace of the poverty even early on is something that's, I mean, again, it's an ancient Christian thing. The Desert Fathers and the mendicant orders, Franciscans and Dominicans, and vowing. Well, we vow poverty too, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay, we have Phil and then Greg.
And Father, echoing, I think, Marie's observation about the importance of the poverty, and it really was a lyrical passage, and I can't find it, but where she says in modernity, which was for her, yet she's probably writing in the 30s or 40s, I don't know exactly when, we've lost the appreciation for poverty, and that's something that I think we'll be able to unpack a little bit later on. I'd like to just offer another observation about her appreciation of beauty. And I don't recall where I became aware, but she often quoted Dostoevsky's "Beauty Will Save the World." But in what we've read so far, there's the appreciation of beauty in nature. And I know that she was a lover of opera, her love of literature comes across very much. And again, just that appreciation of the human, the beauty in relationships among people. It just comes through in a lot of different ways.
Amen. Amen. That's a that's a good point. Thank you.
Greg?
Oh, the conversation moved on, but I wanted to add about Father Patrick in the South. We were actually looking and kind of the separation of Catholic and Protestant. We were looking to move at one time to the Research Triangle. We were with a realtor, and we had asked, are there any Catholic churches around? And the realtor in the front seat said she was driving us around. She goes, oh, my daughter has a Catholic friend. One Catholic friend.
Yeah.
The other time, I had invited my friend to Mass. He was a Protestant, and he was amazed at the sign of the cross. He had no idea what that was. And I had never attended a non-Catholic service.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. And still to this day, I don't know how much mingling goes on.
Well, I was funny.
Oh, much more.
I was a pastor down there in 2002 when I was first ordained, an associate pastor. And for the first Ash Wednesday, I got my ashes, and I was out shopping or something. And this person was like, got something on your. And I was like, what? And, I was like thinking it was a bug or something. And they were like, no, you got a smudge. It's like, oh, those are my ashes. And they're like, they had no clue. None. Zero. Yeah, so that was 2004 or 2002. Yeah.
Mhm.
John?
The point about that started this conversation about sort of the prevalence of Catholicism, the thing that struck me was when she had said she had only had conversations with nuns and priests and had not talked with an individual lay person. That was striking because so much of her time was spent with the poor, who at that time were overwhelmingly European immigrants and who would have been heavily Catholic.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, from Italy, Italy and
Yeah, except for the black poor.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe she just maybe it's like somewhat some poetic license in her own writing to, I don't know, make a statement or something. But yeah, she certainly would have had a lot of contact. And those picnics that were in Chicago. Now those were kind of communist rallying points, but there were certainly, I'm sure, families of Greeks and Italians that had their own foods and things of that nature who were talking about faith and things of that nature. I'm sure as well. At least I presume.
Mhm.
Tabby?
I think that one of the things that I didn't like in the very beginning was that sort of stream of consciousness sort of writing that she does. And it's interesting because you sort of wonder what the purpose was when she was actually writing the book, if it was to get her information out there in a way that people would be able to get something from it, or if it was just to kind of get it out there. But I think that's very there are a lot of dichotomies, it seems, with her. So when you're talking about exactly the with the with she certainly had Catholic people that she was dealing with, and said it just as John just said, all of these people who are Catholic, and yet she didn't feel that she had those types of interactions. And then she's such a giving person and taking care of everyone, and yet when you understand the relationship she had with her daughter, that was completely different. So I just think there are a lot of dichotomies, in her life and in her work. She seemed to be very hung up with the fact that she did work with the poor, to try to take care of them and feed them, but she also had this concern, and maybe this comes up more later in the book, with the fact that no one was doing anything to stop it. No one was dealing with those things in society, and we try to deal with those things today, policies and things like that keep people in poverty. So it just seems that there's a lot of pull in different directions with her. I just wonder, I guess, what her plan was in writing the book, if it was just sort of to get it out there, or for the audience, or for herself.
Well, I think again, when we get to the end, I'm rereading this. This is my second time through. So, but I think that'll be answered in the end. I have a question for the audience though. So, because I forget who had mentioned about, I don't know which Jack it was, maybe, or somebody was talking about the meandering, and it is true. But I thought to myself a couple of different times, and this may sound weird, like I thought to myself, I wonder if I would have liked her. I think I would have maybe respected her because she had convictions or something, but because of she seemed elusive. She would do this and she'd do it for a little bit, and then she'd do that for a little bit, and she'd do that. And remember when she went off to Europe? This is after she was a nurse and stuff like that. So she goes off to London. So that's one of those weird things. She was engaged in all this work and poverty early in her life, and she's a nurse during even the 1918 flu pandemic and stuff. But then she goes off to Paris and London, and she spends months in Capri and Naples, and that's so I was just wondering, I wonder if I would have thought she was flaky or not. Did anybody else think that, like?
Yeah.
Weird.
So I thought, I found myself thinking, and thank you for bringing that up, Father Patrick. It wasn't, I didn't think of it in that way, would I like her? But I found myself putting myself in those situations saying, what would it have been like to be in those, like on the beach in those conversations on Staten Island, or in a certain, in one of the rooms where, you know, when she was serving as a nurse. And I felt like, it might have all depended. It might have been situational. You know, I could have seen myself going both ways. Like she clearly had a deep caring for humanity and for people, and that was expressed, you know, numerous times in the first two parts. But there were also times where, you know, I kind of like, oh wow, I'm not like, there were dismissive parts. There were, you know, parts where she clearly overreacted to her one suitor at the ball, where she slapped him. And I just felt like there was this dichotomy in her personality, which, like, we're all complicated. So I you know, give her the grace for that. But yeah, I found myself in that same kind of thought process.
I think she was probably more confrontative than
Right.
comes across in here. She's really a street person, and
Yeah.
she can use street language, and I have the impression that she did without too much hesitation and so forth. The one direction, though, that someone mentioned at the beginning, and I thought was a fruitful direction, and perhaps it'll come up more later in the book, but it was all the way through. As a woman, she did a lot of things, it seemed to me, that were way ahead of her time.
Absolutely.
And required a tremendous amount of courage and not taking no for an answer and so forth. Did anybody else?
Absolutely.
Jack?
You know, one of the things I was waiting for was her definition of the long loneliness. And it finally came on the very bottom of 157 and the top of 158. I don't know if people caught it, but I was trying to figure out how this all ties into where she's going, because I don't know. I don't agree with her definition of long loneliness at all. I'd like to hear what other people have to say about that and how it ties into what her overall message is for this two parts.
Mara?
That particular one, 157-58, is within her also otherwise interesting comments about women and the fundamental socialness of women, much more so than men. And then she puts that into her theme of long loneliness. But Father Pat and I the other day, Pat asked me, what did I think was the long loneliness? And I said, and it has proved out in my review for our session tonight, that there are several places where she explicitly mentions the long loneliness. And it's a little bit different, although a little bit the same each time. And indeed, I have one section underlined here that points me to page 138, but without her mentioning long loneliness. But I think it is about her long loneliness. Now let's see. Yes, it's one of the best paragraphs, I think, of her whole book. On 138, about the fifth paragraph, a fairly long one, before the next chapter starts. She says, yet always those deep moments of happiness gave way to a feeling of struggle, physical struggle, mortal combat, giving birth to a child. Would Tamar be baptized? I knew the rending it would cause in human relations. I was to be torn and agonized again, and I was all for putting off the hard day. She didn't use long loneliness there, but I think that may define it better than any other place that she does use long loneliness. But what I said to Pat also in response to what about the long loneliness is that I, in my rereading, am coming to the conclusion that the long loneliness isn't really the theme, but the seed the seed of God's call and the development of it and the deepening of it and so forth. And
Right.
feel a variety of that. Anyway, though, that's my 2 cents. I better shut up.
Mara?
So 2 things addressing, would we have liked Dorothy Day? If you just take a look at least the cover of the book I have, I don't know if you can see that. To me, she would be unapproachable. Like if I met her on the street, and then talking about a woman ahead of her time, you know, when she took those bus trips to DC as a very young, you know, she was in New York City. That just amazed me. I wouldn't have done that in the 1980s when I was that age. Like to go on these the suffragette marches and stuff. So I think she definitely, she definitely like did not. I don't think it ever crossed her mind, why can't I do this just because I'm a woman?
Right.
And that was just really impressive to me. And I think, as Father Pat said, she did have moxie.
Yeah.
And a lot of moxie. And I agree with Father Reddington too on the long loneliness, is that the journey to where her calling. So yeah, that was my few cents there.
Tabby and then Marie.
You know, it's interesting. Again, I'm going to say the dichotomy. That wasn't my point, but you know, about that point, it's just very. I think that there are many dichotomies. Her searching. I think that the different lives that she had were her constant searching for what her call really was. So she had this call out there, but she hadn't quite figured out how she was going to manage it or what she was going to do with it. And I think we all feel that, you know, to a great degree. And especially if you're involved in a church and you try different things and you think, well, that wasn't really my call, but she knows that she has that call. But I think the fact that she was not, that she didn't live within the constraints of women of that time allowed her to do those things, because many other women who, even having heard that call, would not have had that courage, and they would have settled for, and I don't mean settled, but would have settled for a marriage and children, and would not have had those opportunities. I think she was extremely well read. She was very well educated. You know, whatever came from her parents gave her this idea that she did not have to settle. And I don't mean that but I think from her perspective. Yeah, and I think that, but it was, as Father Reddington said, that call. I was going to say that same thing. She had that call, and she was searching, I think, constantly for how to live out that call or to meet that call.
I think she's a Midwestern girl too. Midwestern girl. There's a kind of moxie, has something to do with moxie.
Marie?
Just sharing, I came across a news release. Her granddaughter, the youngest of her 9 grandchildren, because her mother had 6 daughters and 3 sons.
All right.
Sometime around 2014, 2015, wrote a book, Dorothy Day, The World Will Be Saved by Beauty, an intimate portrait of my grandmother. And in the book, she writes not just about her grandmother, but about her mother, and how her grandmother's, all of her work and her personality affected her mother's marriage. Her mother was active in the Catholic worker movement as well. Her father, this is Kate Hennessy, the granddaughter, her father was opposed to that, and the parents were divorced.
Wow.
And there's the 4 sisters still remain active in the Catholic worker movement, and they're very devoted to their grandmother and their mother, Maggie, Susie, Martha, and Kate. So just if you want to, after we're done with this, if you want to go on and see how a personal story I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
So what about, there was something, one of the things that, and this goes back, again, forgive me, I forgot who started the meandering thing, but I do find that somewhat intriguing because she talks about, when she's early on in Chicago, she talks about this idea a number of times about freedom being intoxicating. You know, again, she was young. She was 16. She went off to school.
Yeah.
And wasn't afraid to work, and frankly, was living in mice-infested houses. She was like, okay, well, that's what people have to do. That's what they do. So again, I admire her on so many levels. But she talks about this idea of freedom, and so that freedom definitely led her around. But it was somewhat of an exterior freedom. Like I think she was searching for something, and all the while there was this interior freedom.
Right.
I think that really struck me, of course, when, like I said, when she went to Europe after all those poverty experiences, and she said, okay, well, I now have freedom I'm going to enjoy Paris. And I'm going to enjoy, how many people get to do that? Not many, especially at that time. So she was using her freedom. I don't think she understood, well, she was searching for that idea of freedom. And the Ignatian sense, of course, we're always looking for interior freedom. What are you free from? So you're free to engage. So she was engaging, but I think she was still looking for a deeper source than just an external, well, everyone's supposed to be taken care of so people can be good, which is actually a very good thing. She even, goes after the socialists, well, we're the saints here. You guys keep talking about things, but how can we really change things?
Right.
Anyway, I was intrigued by her search for freedom. I don't know if anyone else was intrigued by that. Or I might be crazy. He tells me that all the time. I don't listen.
It's an extremely American thing. Freedom, freedom is maybe the biggest noun in American culture.
Okay, well, that one went over like a dead. All right, Craig, somebody's picking up the man.
I don't, am I on mute?
Nope, now you're
No,
on mute.
Now you're muted, Eric.
Yeah, I don't, I like your point. I mean, she spent a whole year at that hospital, working hard, and I don't know, it's fine for, she was experiencing her freedom in the world, and I think she deserved going off to those countries and experience different types of freedom.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely. But I think ultimately her interior freedom is what she's really was drawing her around, and she didn't understand that. And that was part of her journey, of course, to go to those places and she even, again, the money that she got for writing her first book, $5,000. They always joke, young people go, everyone always says that was a lot of money back in the day. Well, it was a lot of money back in the day.
Yeah.
Remember, you could buy a house for $2,000, so.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes, as well, even one of her paydays where she got, $200 that kept her going for weeks, obviously, that was just the time, but I do think that like the first part was kind of giving her background, setting the stage. And I think intentionally, the second part was she's trying to find the direction she's going to go in. So yeah, maybe she was meandering, maybe she was trying different things, having the freedom to, whether she was a nurse or going to Europe or, the Staten Island, sort of beach house, kind of lifestyle. She was finding where she fit in. So I think that maybe that was intentional. We'll see as I finish the book. Obviously, I haven't read the third part yet, but that might have been intentional in how she wanted to convey her struggle with what she would do going forward. And I think the last sentence of part 2 kind of was like, aha,
Oh, yeah. Amen. Amen.
She was also quite internationally involved from very young and throughout her life. Think of the names of her best friends there on Staten Island, Sasha, and I forget what his wife's name was, or Sasha, and a Russian Jew and Jewess, I think, and others as well. Of course, Forster was British, and she in her reading, of course, was a master of European culture. Dickens and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, you don't need to go any farther than that. But she read, well, Huysmans was kind of interesting, maybe second level novelist, but she really did get involved in things European a bit too. But,
Mara and then Phil.
So what I kept, when you were talking about her going to Europe and what is she searching for, it kind of reminded me of the journey that the priest in The Devil's Advocate, and then also in what's the name of the book? Was it The Power and the Glory?
Yeah, The Power and the Glory, yeah.
Yeah, where here we have Dorothy Day, and then we had the priest in each of those. They go out from where they were, and it's when they do that, they actually can discover more of who they are and who they're to become. And I'm sure you guys planned that when you picked these books here for us. But anyway.
very good, Mara. No.
Well, and St. Ignatius, Francis of Assisi, Dominic, I mean, again, Francis of Assisi had an incredible life, you know, before his conversion. He was a Catholic, but, you know, how dramatic do it be? He takes off his clothes, says, have them all. I want nothing from this. And he was called, before that, the king of the parties. So, you know, that search for freedom does take meandering. Yeah. I mean, Jim, he was a bum. He was on the streets for years before he said, oh, I wasn't supposed to say that.
Mumbai. Teacher, give me.
Phil and then Mary.
Some observations about two of the questions that have been put out there. The long loneliness, I interpret it in terms of just not fitting. And I've had that experience of thinking, boy, one of us is on the wrong planet here. Whether I don't belong or you don't belong, I don't know, but a totally different worldview kind of things. And she started as kind of a leftist intellectual, and she really an elitist. The people that it was the considerations of the poor were an intellectual it was a concept rather than a lived experience as she started. And she gradually found that she didn't fit with the ideological framework there. We've just kind of begun her Catholic conversion, but it will become a major theme where her frustration with the Catholic Church not taking up social justice causes. So for all her devotion to Catholicism, she still felt that she didn't fit there, that there was just something else that just wasn't falling into place. And I think the leftist intellectual piece kind of gets to the likability aspect also, is that she starts with what I still find among a lot of elitists, they like, you know, people in the abstract, but dealing with the poor can be repulsive in a lot of specific ways. That experience of being with the poor is very different from these intellectual discussions.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that she started with kind of that intellectual appreciation, and she would be fairly upfront about her struggles to deal with the unpleasantries about being with the poor also.
I agree very much, Phil, and it's in the book at several points, being torn basically between friends who believe only in theory, or I think she proves she is what the Jews would call a mensch by insisting on practice and becoming a wobbly, a IWW, who insisted on having their theory be applied to the poor, not just be in the book there so people can read it and say, whoa.
And remember, even in her descriptions of being in, you're right, Phil, about being in certain places, the smells. And she talks about how, yeah, the decrepit conditions. the jails, again, the mice running through the walls and these just, of course, no heat and things of this nature. But again, the smell, it was interesting. She specifically says things like that, like the smell of death, the smell of sickness, the smell of poverty, and it's very powerful.
We wouldn't be reading her, I don't think, if she hadn't modeled all this for Catholics. She sort of put it into the 20th century and now the 21st century for American Catholics, especially, in a way maybe bigger than anybody else.
Jack?
Father Pat.
Yep.
I wanted to get back to your comment about freedom, and it took me a while to do that, but I got to page 135 where I think she bumped up against something that she actually said, it's going to tie me down to have a baby. And it kind of conveyed to me that she sees that freedom is not absolute, but if you read the bottom of that paragraph, what came through to me was in her acceptance that her freedom was going to change now, even though she said she'd be tied down by having a baby, she was able to rejoice in that.
Amen. Well, you remember, it's a very good point, Jack. She talked a lot about her relationship with her brother, who was a baby. Yeah. And I always thought that was a little weird, only because I'm the youngest of 11 and I had my older siblings take care of me. And again, they did a really good job, but I'm sure I was a pain in the neck. I'm sure they weren't every night going, oh, I want to bathe Patrick and put him to bed, or read him to sleep. I'm sure they were like, that's the last thing I want to do because he's being a pain in the butt. But she could be that way. She was so magnanimous towards her younger brother because in some ways he wasn't hers. Yeah. She was connected. But you're right, Phil, about this new kind of understanding of like freedom, or what that means. That's a good point, I think. But that early on she didn't. She could be free because she knew eventually this is mom's baby. It's not mine. I can take care of it, but now it's different. So.
That is a great paragraph, Jack.
It is.
For those keeping score, it's the fourth paragraph on 135. Yeah.
I was enchained. That's a good name. So. What do you all think about her writing? I find it, I like it. And again, just like Jim had pointed out this one paragraph, Jack's paragraph, there are times when I'm just rolling along and going, wow, I'm just enjoying this as a reader myself. And then every once in a while, just a lightning strike, like, boy, she just summed something up in a way that was like, wow. Did everybody else like that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Father. I mean, I would have my pencil and I'd be reading along and just nothing would jump out at me. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, wow. And I'm like underlining or circling or something, just, it's the same thing. And it's going to be meaningless when I go back and look at my notes, but it's just, and just like that page 135, I had kind of bracketed that, and 138, when we talked about that, just like I said, was reading along and just was like, ooh, this is.
Yeah, I write stuff all over my pages here. I do the same thing. And sometimes I'm underlining everything on a page. I'm like, that's wasting ink. But yeah, I'm just so enamored by her. Yeah, she is compelling.
That chapter, having a baby, is really something.
Yeah. John?
It struck me, Father, when you asked about her writing style, that for all her admiration of Conrad and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Dickens, that she really, I think, writes much more like the journalist that she was than a novelist.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I never thought of it that way, but it is, yeah. You get a point for that. Point to Gryffindor. So were people scandalized by some of the, he's talking about babies and other things and
No.
Socialists and everything.
socialists, and no one's too scandalized? Oh, yeah. Because it's funny, I bet you some people, well, I know that she, her cause is up for canonization. And I'm sure there are people who are saying that, no, look at this life that she led. Again, it's funny, even about, she talks about the anti-Semitism and all this association with like the left. Again, listen, I'm not saying the left is perfect, it's not, but it is interesting that people will say, well, they're socialists, so they just want to take everything of yours and they're all Jews. I mean, you still see that today. I mean, it's really weird that the same tropes are just rolled out, well, that's just George Soros, or that's a socialist or whatever. And there's always a tie to, again, like the perfidious Jews or things of this nature. And so I know that there would be people writing letters to the Vatican or to the dicastery about this going, no, she was a part of this cabal of socialists that were out to tear down the foundation of Western Europe or Christianity.
There are probably 3 devil's advocates for her.
Yeah, got a lot of work to do.
Mary?
Who's next? I'm sorry.
Mary?
I was taken with that too, Father, about her associations and how would this go down, and people reading this of today, and I agree, the same tropes are happening. And she even talks at the end of part 2 about how the press distorted the goals and agendas, that it was really to create fair working conditions, wages, and other benefits, a safety net of sorts. And we see that today. I mean, when I think of how when the term socialist comes up, it's just demonized. And when actually what she was fighting for with those affiliations that she had was actually Christian virtues that weren't being picked up, according to her, by the church. That the church was falling flat on a lot of these social issues, and that these secular groups were the ones who are actually advocating on the ground, boots on the ground for the poor. And I wonder, is the perception that the church has turned a corner on that? Was she instrumental in calling attention to that?
I absolutely. And remember that of course, that part of American history that was called the progressive era. And so, Roosevelt, the 40-hour work week, I think, came in around that time.
Plus welfare, plus
welfare, working conditions, especially like, remember there was that awful in New York where, of course, she was living, that Dorothy would have remembered, the garment district fire. There were all these women that died who were basically chained into this factory, this garment factory making garments that went up in flames, and like hundreds of people died. That did, again, just a tragic, well, not tragic because it was these evil slave labor or workers forcing this kind of slave labor. So there was a lot of that in the air. So she wasn't like out of context.
Yes, the 30s were, in a lot of questions, I think most of us probably would have been with some of the people who now would be considered outside the pale, communists, socialists, what have you. It was the Depression.
Marie, then Mara.
I found it interesting that when I realized that she was born in 1897, she lived through a pandemic, through World War I. She traveled extensively. She mixed with all different groups. She had many jobs. She had very little money. and she lived to be 83 without the health care we have today. So she had to be a strong woman.
Yeah.
And even though she went through periods of loneliness, there was always a way. And I think she, you know, she definitely found it at the end in the Catholic religion to help her get through each one of those phases.
Amen. And people mentioned, by the way, just in the chat, thank you for that. It was a triangle waistcoat fire or something.
Yeah.
A shirtwaist fire. It was called the triangle shirtwaist fire. Again, just an absolute tragedy. So, what about this? So, remember, so she goes to jail twice, and the second time she goes to jail, she's back in Chicago. The first time she was doing the suffragette things, and again, they were in the jails and they were doing the hunger strike, and she was quite young and she felt very righteous. But the second time, again, she was picked up while she was at this at the hotel that was I think the IWW, like
The Wobblies.
yeah, the workers kind of hang out in the hotel.
Sorority house.
Yeah.
And so they were, basically doing just a sweep, and they just got caught up, literally caught up, because of this one young lady that she was taking care of. And of course, she gets taken off, and it was interesting, the humiliation that she felt, because it wasn't, now she's being accused of something totally different. She's being accused of basically being a prostitute. Why are you there if you aren't, a prostitute? Why would you be there? Because, there's no reason for a respectable woman or whatever. Those kind of terms were
And
thrown
remember,
around.
she's a Chicago girl.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. And she goes into some pretty great detail about that experience of
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
And she had seen a lot of the world. So it wasn't like people hadn't accused her of maybe even being promiscuous, but it was something different about authority, I think, in the abuse of authority. And again, the narrative, like, again, everyone who's in this place is, whatever, evil or something like that. I just thought that was really rather interesting. Anybody else remember that or have a feeling about that? Why are always Father Jim's questions better than mine? That's another question. All right, but I don't want an answer to that, okay? He's cleverer than I am.
No, I think one thing is that she made it explicit a little bit later in a kind of a well-chiseled phrase, but that first time, or that at that time being in jail in Chicago, she may have found out, at least in certain circumstances, who the police belonged to. And she, not so much ashamed at that, I guess, but PO'd at that, perhaps.
Well, again, the dynamics of power, and of course, women, and as a pretty independent woman who was actually just taking care of her friend, and she didn't even know this young lady very well, but she knew this young lady was in trouble, and now they're both, even though she knows this young woman's situation, and she does say that she was a prostitute because that's the only thing she could do to basically feed herself, because she had been abandoned. So the whole kind of social collapse of why are people stuck in these awful situations, and under the thumb of abusive men, basically, who are the police or whatever.
Jack?
Father Pat, again, I think it speaks to your notion of scandals that she was caught up in. I think this was kind of a minor one. I'm no great Catholic theologian, but the bigger scandal that I would think would be, here's a woman who's had a child out of wedlock. How many female saints have had a child out of wedlock?
Yeah. That's a good point. Now, I'm sure there are some. Because sometimes the hagiographies have been retouched a little bit, maybe. Again, if you were on the Devil's Advocate, remember, that was interesting. We're finding out about that the soldier, and you're finding out about, I forget his name now, but yeah, he did some really awesome things. But he also fathered a child out of wedlock, and does that make him not yeah? It's an interesting concept. you want more wine, Father Jim?
No, thanks. No,
That's the only time he's ever said that. No, I'm sorry.
Mara?
I'm just loving this discussion. There's so many great points here. And when she was arrested that second time to address Father Pat's, so he doesn't feel so lonely there.
Thank you.
I reckon, I don't know what it was, but it seemed very different from when she was arrested when she was in DC and went to Occoquan. And I couldn't tell whether it was because of the cause. She was like, one, she was just sleeping and just, you know, this changed. I think before this happened, she said, I did something that changed the trajectory or something like that, where she ended up, you know, asleep with her friend, you know, so she could take care of her friend. And or whether it was just such a difference between the Chicago police and the New York police, the DC police, and what they were all about. I don't know. There was a lot going on there, I felt like. It's just fascinating as you talk and bring up these points. I'm thinking of going back in my head about what I've read, and it's really putting it all into place for me. Trying to give some clarity to what I was reading, because sometimes I found her writing hard too, because she was talking about, you know, this organization, and it was getting all fluxed in my head. But but this is a really good discussion because she's such a complex person, and this journey of hers trying to find out what her purpose is. So thank you for bringing these points up.
Marie and then Joe.
Well, additionally, when you're done, anytime you'd like to, if you'd like to further study her, David Brooks in his book, The Road to Character, has a great a chapter devoted to Dorothy Day. And it's very interesting, and it comes from, you know, a person who has studied her. It's not a biography, which of course is different, but I think you'd find it interesting if you want to do a little enrichment on your own, in addition to the
What's the name of the book again?
The Road to Character by David Brooks.
Thank you.
David Brooks he's a commentator.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm a big fan of David Brooks.
An important ethicist, I think, among other things. Yeah.
Joe?
Back to the illegitimacy of the child. She makes a specific point that she was common law married. So they'd never gone through a ceremony, but the law accepted a couple as being married if they'd been together for a period of time, 5 years or 7 years.
Thank you.
Yep.
And that Staten Island period of hers was several years, I think. Wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah. Now, did anyone else, I'm being a little bit flippant here, you know, kind of, you know, the idea of Staten Island being kind of a beach resort, that was a little bit
it's bigger than we think. It's bigger than we think, I think.
I just don't, think of Staten Island again. I've been there a couple of times, but So anyway, I always thought that was kind of interesting.
No, I had to look it up and try to get what map I could of it and learn a few new things, because I thought it was just a little hole in the wall.
Jack?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I understand what Joe said, but Father Pat and Father Jim, did the Catholic Church acknowledge a common law marriage at that time?
I think they did, because, for example, this is going to sound a little bit bizarre, and this has to do with sex. If you were living with someone, if you were cohabitating with someone for longer than, I think it was even 6 months, and of the opposite sex, again, homosexuality wasn't even a kind of a thought before 1969 almost. They presumed you were having sex, and it was just a presumption and because of that, that's when kind of the clock would start almost for like judging when do common law statutes might click in. Now, they wouldn't recognize it as a sacramental marriage.
As a Catholic marriage, in
But-
sacramental sense. No.
But every marriage does count. It's just not sacramental. But actually, Jack, I am gonna have to look that one up. I'm not. That's a real interesting question. I'm gonna look that one up.
Uh-huh.
I'll have an answer for you next time.
Okay.
Yes, well, of course, marriage is I'm no expert on canon law, church canon law, but there are a lot more of the volumes of canon law that are taken up with marriage cases, marriage legislation, and so on and so on. Probably second most would be inheritance, and third most something else trailing far behind. But my point is that marriage, they've been dealing with it for 2,000 years and so on, and there are always questions.
Father Pat had made the observation earlier about the effect of Tamar's birth, but it's eloquent, and I think that I just had grandchildren visiting this weekend. I experienced it in watching my wife become a mother. I've seen my children become mothers, and it is an awe-inspiring thing that I think she does give powerful expression to.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And again, someone rightly commented in our chat that St. Augustine, of course, had a child out of wedlock.
Oh, true.
And again, St. Ignatius, God bless him. We don't know if he had a child out of luck, but if he was anywhere as incontinent sexually as he was with his drinking and fighting, there's a good possibility. So.
And who knows, maybe Francisco.
Yeah.
Of Assisi, of course.
Yeah.
Not of Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
Mary?
Mary?
Maybe she's gone on.
Mary, are you supposed to be talking?
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
That love of nature that she forges with Forster out on Staten Island, how he opens that whole world up to her, and it provides her with another window into the spiritual, to God. Is that what is considered mystical? Is that what mysticism is, an attachment to the natural world, and see, or is that not? I don't know what mystics are, but
people talk, I think rightly, about nature mysticism, but it isn't all that is talked about when mysticism is talked about.
Well, I really found that especially in this environmental moment that we find ourselves in right now, that marriage of her growing faith with an appreciation for the natural world, I thought was a really interesting perspective for her to gain at that time in Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things, like even when we look historically at the church in the Middle Ages, especially from really the 11th century on, the mysticism of the cult of the Virgin Mary becomes rather big. All those great cathedrals of Europe are named after the Blessed Mother. So there was something very special and amazing going on there about a mysticism of the feminine at that time, when it's expressed in art. And in the Renaissance, you kind of get something different. In the Renaissance, there is more, it's going back to the classical times. And so you see, again, the statue of David by Michelangelo is a perfect example. Here's a nude statue of a male, which would have been, the epitome of Greek or Roman standards of beauty, would be the male figure, not the female figure. And David, even though he's a Jew, looks like a Roman god. And it's also interesting that in the statue, he's not circumcised. And again, they knew what circumcision was, of course, and stuff like that. But again, the idea is they're going back to something absolutely totally different. And so there are these periods of time, you're right, where mysticism takes on different kinds of characters. And so we need a deeper mysticism of the earth right now. So
What
there is love mysticism too, of course,
What
based
is
on the lover
mysticism?
beloved relationship.
But what is it? Mysticism, like what does it mean?
well, for example, like nuns or priests or monks who pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament. You know, they're in a very confined space, a monastery or a convent. Yet their world is open to all of reality through their mystical connection to Christ. Through it's a deep inner connection to Christ. In India, where Father Jim has spent so much time, on the tabernacles, they actually put the symbol for the universe on that. It's the Indian symbol for Om, is that right? And I always thought that was fascinating. So here in this tabernacle, if an Indian person were looking at that symbol, they would see inside there is all of the universe, basically. And we do say that Christ was, basically, eternity shut into a span of a lifetime. So it's kind of hard to explain, but
I would say that the profoundest spiritual experiences, and there are several types, and some undiscovered yet, of course, are generally considered mysticism. Someone who is one of the considered in Christianity, one of the great examples of mysticism, Saint Teresa of Avila,
Right.
a very, very human person, very much a woman, and very much a kind of a person who would go back and forth on you, kidding you and stuff like that in conversation. And she would kid God in conversation as well, but also her deep moments of spiritual union with God are considered the top
Castle.
on the top shelf of mysticism. Saint John of the Cross, whom she persuaded to help her reform the Carmelite monasteries and convents of Spain at that time. And it got him thrown into jail a lot and so on, because every monastery had a jail. I don't know if Teresa was thrown into a jail, but she was a big reformer. So anyway, Ignatius Loyola also is a great mystic, but the most profound levels of spirituality, of prayer, of experience, of God experience, and of union with God.
And John, thank you for this great definition in our chat. So John put up the belief that direct knowledge of God, spiritual truth, or ultimate reality can be attained through subjective experience, such as intuition or insight. And of course, subjective experience is what each one of us has. So we can't have universal experience. It's the universal experience almost coming into our subjectivity.
Yeah.
So that's a very good definition.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, so thanks. All right. I think that's a good place to end, unless you got something.
Okay, only one other passage that we haven't talked much about and need not, but Saint Augustine came across the I think as being another great Catholic who had an illegitimate child. Well, on page 36, the middle of the page is a tremendous, rip-roaring, beautiful passage from St. Augustine. The language of it and style seems to be from the Confessions. I can't place it in the Confessions, but that doesn't matter. It stands by itself here very well. But as far as a praise of the love of God, it's hard to find any greater one. On page 36. then.
Well, actually, let's read, this is mysticism, I think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I'll read it. So page 36, uh, you know, three paragraphs down, I read St. Augustine at this time, and he spoke also of this love. What is it that I love when I love you? That's God. Not the beauty of any bodily thing, nor the order of seasons, but not the brightness of the light that rejoices the eye, nor the sweet melodies of all songs, nor the sweet fragrances of flowers, herbs, and ointments and spices, nor manna, nor honey, not the limbs which carnal love embraces. None of these things I love in loving my God. So it's this more profound experience beyond our senses that grasps us and rattles us and gets into our bones.
Mhm. Yeah, and then the next paragraph, he doesn't exclude completely what he had just kind of excluded, but he puts it in context.
All right, we have delved a lot. So this is a great
Thank you, everyone.
conversation.
Yes,
I forget how much I missed this until we do it again.
great.
So again, we're going to be, what is it, March, when is it? March 20th?
Yeah, March 20th, I think.
20th.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah,
Can't-
Feb is 4 weeks, so everything is the same in March. It's a Sunday again, the 20th.
All right, fantastic. So everybody be blessed. Again, we'll be finishing the book up at that time, and yeah, fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
Can I
very
speak
much.
about Jim for a
Thank
moment?
you.
Good night, Beth.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.
Good night.
Night.
Good
Remember
night,
your
everybody. Good night, everybody.
Father Jim,
Yes,
were you in Jamshedpur?
yes.
I went there to visit Bill Tome.
Oh, wonderful man.
And
I don't remember. I've been to Jamshedpur too. When did you go, Joe?
68.
Uh-huh. He was the superior of the Jesuits of Jamshedpur.
Yes.
then, wasn't he? Yes,
Yes.
yes. And he later came here to you of Scranton.
Well, he was at Scranton first, then went to Jamshedpur, then came back.
Okay, that's right.
Did he teach you when you were
Yes.
here?
Philosophy, of course.
Okay.
And so where did you,
okay.
in Jamshedpur, did you go to, were you in, what
To
was
the
school?
Tata outfit, and to the Labor Institute.
Yeah, the XLRI, and, but there was a high school there too, wasn't there?
Yes, Loyola School. That was kind of.
Then they took me up into the back country to out to the mission.
Oh, Chaibasa and those places?
Lupangutu?
You
Or-
can't prove it by me.
Or maybe Dunbad, the coal area. When I first
They-
saw
it was
Dunbad, I
Out
said-
past the Untouchables. It was
Okay,
out in the tribal people.
Oh,
yes,
that-
yes,
that
oh,
was
yes.
the,
In Lupangutu and Chaibasa.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Great,
fantastic.
great.
It was a lovely time.
Good.
I graduated in '59, so Tom was one of my guys.
Uh-huh, yeah. Good man, strong man.
Very good man.
Amen. That's awesome.
Great, Joe. Thank you.
Peace.
Okay, everybody.